Welcome back, viewers. Dave Epstein here from the Post-Pollock firm. Today, here to talk about war and the Constitution and Congress and the President. The question has been raised, is this war legal? Is it constitutional? Let's start with the fact that Congress, under Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, has the authority to declare war. And it doesn't give the President the right to do that. But the Article 2, Section 2 places the president as the commander-in-chief of the military. And throughout the course of our history, that power has been used for what we call police actions, where there's an imminent threat, etc., and Congress, there's no need to formally declare war, but you're going into aggression in a foreign place. Now, how do these two play together and how do they work with the Iran war? Well, an attempt was made in the 1970s. It was called War Powers Resolution. And it was a resolution by Congress that sought to limit the president's ability to basically start a war without calling it a war. Specifically, what they had in mind there was the Vietnam War, because Congress had never actually declared war on Vietnam. Actually, Richard Nixon vetoed that resolution, or that, we call it a bill, and Congress overrode him and said, yes, we're going to have this in place. Basically, it requires that when the president justifies through his commander-in-chief policing powers, when he tries to engage in some sort of military action, especially overseas, he has a certain period of time within which he has to seek Congress's approval. I believe it's 60 days. There are more nuanced parts of that procedure, but it's a 60-day window where he's got to explain what the basis is for the action and see whether Congress will approve going forward with it or whether Congress will just declare war. The War Powers Act also requires that the Congress has to be consulted in every possible instance. And I know there has been some accusation and some claims by Congress that they were not properly consulted by the president about our current activities in Iran. There is also some denial, both by, I think, the defense secretary and others have said, well, this isn't a war, even though the president keeps referring to it as a war and talking about obliterating and stomping, and so does the secretary of defense. You know, the old saying, if it walks like a duck and it quacks, it's a duck. We are bombing the daylights out of Iran, and Iran, it appears to be a war. So the question comes as to when can the president invoke those powers? Generally speaking, it's when there is an imminent threat to the United States and the safety of the United States. Now, there's some issue as to whether that extends to United States military activities overseas. I think generally people have interpreted to include that. I'm certainly in favor of that. If there is a threat to U.S. troops, U.S. military bases, civilians at those bases, in addition to our soldiers who are out there serving their country, absolutely. So the question is, what was the imminent threat? Well, that has raised some issues. And this question of whether a war or a military action or police action is constitutional has been a gray area in the United States and under constitutional law for years, even after the War Powers Act. The president recently attempted to articulate the reasons why we are in Iran and we're lobbing bombs and we're engaging in military action. We've lost a couple of soldiers too. We lost a couple of aircraft, so it's getting less than pretty. So let's see a video where the president described our reasons for being in the war.
Senior White House correspondent Weijia Zhang brings us more now on what President Trump is saying about this war. Weijia, good morning. You said yesterday the key question was why, and we're getting some insight into that now. Good morning.
Good morning, Arrow. Good morning to everybody. You're right. President Trump is really trying to clarify that question that has loomed large, which is what is he trying to accomplish with this bombing campaign? Meanwhile, the administration says the hardest hits have yet to come and that the next phase will be even more punishing for Iran.
The United States military continues to carry out large-scale combat operations in Iran to eliminate the grave threats posed to America.
At its first public event since the U.S. and Israel began bombarding Iran on Saturday, President Trump said he will wage war until Iran's missile capabilities, nuclear ambitions, and navy are all destroyed.
We've knocked out already 10 ships,
Trump justified the attack's timing, citing Iran's ballistic missile capability.
This posed a very clear, colossal threat to America and our forces stationed overseas.
After briefing lawmakers Monday, Secretary of State Marco Rubio echoed that claim.
There absolutely was an imminent threat.
But Democrats who attended the closed-door briefing disagreed.
That briefing raised many more questions than it answered.
There was no imminent threat to the United States of America. There was a threat to Israel.
Rubio argued the U.S. had to hit Iran first to head off harsher retaliation on American targets in the region if Israel had attacked alone.
Obviously, we were aware of Israeli intentions and understood what that would mean for us, and we had to be prepared to act as a result of it.
Now, strikes are still ongoing. Trump said the operation is ahead of schedule but could take a month or longer.
We projected 4 to 5 weeks, but we have capability to go far longer than that. We'll do it.
And Vice President J.D. Vance made his first public remarks since the operation began. During a Fox News interview last night, he said it could go on for a little or a lot longer. A source familiar with his thinking says before the strikes, the vice president was personally against them. But he also said if they were to happen, they should be big and fast. A spokesperson for Vance has declined to comment.
Okay, so there's the president. He said they posed an imminent threat to the United States and its troops overseas. He may be right about the troops overseas. I don't know about the United States. I heard somewhere that he mentioned that they had the capability of launching an ICBM at the United States. I don't know if he has any intelligence or military support for that claim. I don't know of any. And it's interesting because I think it was 8 months ago. Let me show you a clip from 8 months ago when we struck at Iran's nuclear sites. And here's what the president said at that time.
The U.S. military carried out massive precision strikes on the 3 key nuclear facilities in the Iranian regime: Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Everybody heard those names for years as they built this horribly destructive enterprise. Our objective was the destruction of Iran's nuclear enrichment capacity and a stop to the nuclear threat posed by the world's #1 state sponsor of terror. Tonight, I can report to the world that the strikes were a spectacular military success. Iran's key nuclear enrichment facilities have been completely and totally obliterated. Iran, the bully of the Middle East, must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Okay, so 8 months ago, President Trump said that we had completely and totally obliterated Iran's nuclear capability, but he seemed to be raising nuclear capability in his justification for the war. Now, what that does is raise questions over whether or not this is truly a police action and whether there was an imminent threat or not. It's very difficult to tell. The discussion, there was some mention by Secretary of State Rubio, who explained it before, around the same time as the president. Here's what Rubio said.
Well, let's hear the words then from Marco Rubio.
If we stood and waited for that attack to come first before we hit them, we would suffer much higher casualties. And so the president made the very wise decision. We knew that there was going to be an Israeli action. We knew that that would precipitate an attack against American forces. And we knew that if we didn't preemptively go after them before they launched those attacks, we would suffer higher casualties and perhaps even higher those killed. And then we would all be here answering questions about why we knew that and didn't act.
Well, it's somewhat consistent with Trump's explanation. I don't know if it is. I mean, Rubio is basically saying Israel made us do it. I thought we acted independently, but regardless of that, what is happening is that Iran is now launching missiles at everybody, everyone, everywhere. The whole region has gotten drawn into this thing. What I'm hoping is that we have not just triggered World War III, but regardless, this mincing of words that we always see when police actions are undertaken of, well, it's not a war, we're not this. I mean, I think that this is a perfect example of where the War Powers Resolution has to be enacted, or activated rather, and that somebody's going to have to go before Congress and see if they authorize this. Because now there was already great tension between the United States and our European allies, or I might even say at this point our former European allies. I won't get into that now. There is grave concern about everybody getting drawn into this because everybody has interests over there. So many nations rely upon Iranian oil. China is a big buyer of Iranian oil. There are some who have postulated that maybe that's what the administration is up to, that they are trying to stifle China by cutting off their supply of fossil fuel. All I know is, as we've learned in the past, when we get involved in starting wars in that hot mess in the Middle East, things don't always go as pretty as we'd like. And also, putting a superpower with nuclear capability like China into a desperate situation can also lead to unintended and unwanted consequences. So the entire idea, I think, needs to be examined by somebody other than the administration. That would be Congress. And Congress has not yet acted. I don't know what they're doing yet. I suppose they could petition to the Supreme Court to say this war is unlawful. They are engaged in a war, and therefore the president should be ordered to cease all hostilities. I don't know. The other thing that I have heard tossed around, and the president has said this, is that he wants to select the next leader of Iran, although he admitted in one interview that it could very well be. First of all, he admitted that they had killed most of the candidates he would have found acceptable. And secondly, that if they were installed, it might not necessarily be somebody that we want there. To me, regime change is a Pandora's box. It's fraught with peril. We should have learned our lesson in Iran the last time. When we put up a puppet regime, we supported the Shah, and we know what happened. They had the revolution. They got the first Ayatollah in charge. They took a bunch of Americans hostage and held them there for, I forget how many days. It was well over a year. The whole thing became a mess. And then we had almost a half a century of what are pretty crazy leaders, in my opinion, in Iran. I'm not against, the leaders of Iran being overtaken. There was some effort by the citizens of Iran to do that, but they were harshly and brutally suppressed. So I'm not against that, but anytime we or any superpower tries to install their person, there is always a backlash. Right now, I don't know that there has been any overthrow of the regime. A lot of their supreme leader, the Ayatollah, was killed, but supposedly the clerics picked another supreme leader. So that does not bode well for having a new regime that is more open to democratic ideals, etc. That's the idea there. At some point, I think the president and the administration are going to have to explain to Congress and the American people more consistently why this war should continue. They're giving these very vague descriptions of how long this will last, as long as it takes. Well, that doesn't mean anything. We are going to be committing American troops, resources, and already have committed young American lives that have been lost. We better darn well sure we know what we're getting into and why we're getting into and what the objective is. Because candidly, calling it an imminent threat and bombing the daylights out of Iran, the president has already, it does not appear that they have the same capabilities they had only 2 weeks ago. They're saying they're having trouble launching their missiles. Israel has the Iron Dome, which fights off missile attacks. Not all of them, but a lot of them. Other air forces and other military groups in the region, like Qatar, have been shooting down drones, planes, etc. I mean, Iran started attacking everybody. Luckily, it looks like it's been contained, but who knows? But the idea that we're going to continue with this long war, with the idea that there's an imminent threat, better be justified a little bit better, because otherwise, you'd have to come to the conclusion that it could be unconstitutional to continue with this, and it could still be a violation of the War Powers Act. So let's hope that in the very near future, the president, Congress, or both together, which is, listen, I'd love to see that return someday, work together and figure out if this is going to be considered a war and where we are going with this. And we can't just go with what Israel says or anybody else. We have to make our own decision on how to run this and how to deal with this. And that is why the involvement of Congress is required under the War Powers Resolution. So We'll find out more in the coming weeks, but those are the basic legal principles over whether or not this war is lawful, allowed, constitutional. So far, the answer is more likely than not yes, although the reasons are a little shaky or a little, let's say, not articulated quite clearly or consistently. But at the same time, the president has the power to act to prevent an imminent threat. Folks, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something from it. Please hit like and subscribe, and please leave your comments. I will see you next time. This is Dave Epstein signing off for the Post Pollock Firm. Thank you.